Alright, so we've reached the final handheld console we're going to talk about, particularly being the Nintendo DS Lite. This would be my last handheld console I would get for quite some time. The next DS line system I got was the 3DS, and even then I got that a few years late, a little before Smash 4 came out, and I wouldn't get any of the Sony handhelds until later as well. Like the last couple of consoles, though, I was introduced a little before getting it, which I'm sure contributed to my desire for the console. My introduction with the DS, I believe, was WarioWare Touched. I'm not 100% sure. I know it was definitely a WarioWare game. It could have maybe have been one of the GBA ones, since it would have been backwards compatible, but I remember thinking the touchscreen was pretty cool. I just don't remember if I saw it in action or it was just more of a word of mouth thing when me and several classmates were watching someone play on their DS. Was the original model too, I remember. I don't even know if the Lite would have been out yet. And we're back with the original Animal Crossing again. Like I mentioned when I talked about the GameCube, this was one of my favorite games at the time. And my parents had me in sports over the summer for several years. And one year, I was talking to a couple of my teammates about Animal Crossing, and I remember thinking we were all talking about the GameCube one. And eventually, they were talking about getting new hats in that. And in the original, you were stuck with that, bullhorn hat. So here I was thinking it was like a playground rumor, and you had to go through ridiculous requirements to unlock the ability to change your hat or something. Like I was missing out on something. Eventually, one of my teammates would bring in their DS and play it during practice or one of the games or whatever. And I would learn that there was another Animal Crossing game on this platform that I didn't have. Funny enough, that wasn't even the only time there was that confusion with the games. Because I remember a separate situation where some classmates were talking about Animal Crossing, and they were talking about trying to save a bunch of bells, and I had the cheat code for, I think, 30,000 bells in the GameCube one memorized, and I remember giving them a paper with the cheat code, and there being a lot of confusion since I was just like, you just gotta talk to Tom Nook to use the code. You gotta go through the menus. But that wasn't a thing in the DS version, so I probably seemed a little insane, but kind of a funny story. But yeah, I was a little older now, not as impatient or annoying, so I had to wait till the holidays this time to get a DS after I asked for it. But I did get one of the black DS Lites that year. I want to say it was the year it came out in 2006. I already sort of talked about it, but of course I did get Wild World right away. It was kind of a weird game because it was like a step forward and a couple steps back. Since I remember there wasn't a lot of holidays, which is one of the best parts of the GameCube game, and I also missed being able to build your own game collection, which is something we'd never be able to really do in the series again once Virtual Console became a thing, but I didn't really know that for a while. But yeah, you had the new camera, you can see the sky. Like I said, you had hats and hair now. Some new activities and animals to meet. Oh, I remember you had to share one house between all the players too, so my poor sibling, because they never got their own copy, and I remember I was probably a bit of an asshole and wouldn't let them do too much with the game, but it was still a fun time. I definitely put more time and have a bit better memories with the GameCube one, but this is still, solid up there. A decent last hurrah for the series for a bit for me, too, because I did get City Folk, but to me, City Folk just felt like an expansion to Wild World, so I never really played it. Like I said, I didn't get a 3DS until later, so it wasn't until right before Smash 4 came out, talking over 5 years later, that I finally played New Leaf and got into a new entry into the series. I got a lot of Mario early on this time. Mario Kart DS was a standout because, as I mentioned in the Game Boy episode, I had Super Circuit, didn't like it, and it was just kind of mind-blowing to, I was smart enough at this time to sort of know there's difference between what you can do on a home console and a portable. So just the jump from Super Circuit to DS and just even have something like multiple carts from Double Dash brought over. The first time I was aware of Retro Cups because I never unlocked them in the Game Boy version. And even steps forward in this series, like you had Mission Mode, which was super fun, and obviously a lot of people talk about, including myself, about how that really should have came back in a mainline entry outside of Tour. I think the customizable emblems were pretty fun too. I got into that a little bit. Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2 was an interesting one because it was a surprise. I didn't even know this game existed. I didn't really get too into it initially, but eventually I did give it another shot, played all the way through it, enjoyed it decently. Learned about Pauline. This is the game she came back in, like it says right there on the Wikipedia page. And I don't know, I just thought that was pretty neat. I did have Mario Hoops 3-on-3 as well. This was honestly probably my favorite of the sports titles, which kind of makes sense because I'm not a big sport person. I don't really follow any sports. But when I would occasionally play them, basketball was probably my favorite. And yeah, I sunk a lot of time into this DS game. What was kind of interesting too is that this game had some Final Fantasy characters in it. But I had no idea about Final Fantasy in general, so I just thought these were new Mario characters they were introducing. Yet, even then, I felt like something seemed a bit different to them compared to the rest of the cast. But I kind of like that. I also remember thinking there was a connection between the White Mage and Rosalina, mainly because I unlocked White Mage around the same time that I learned about Mario Galaxy and Rosalina. Like, I remember thinking there was some sort of relation, or maybe this was an early version of Rosalina. And then New Super Mario Bros. It was a fun game. I played it a decent bit, but there's a bit more of a story behind it. So, in the GameCube episode, I mentioned someone I would occasionally play video games with who was, in retrospect, a bit of an asshole. And I actually remember seeing this and Mario 64 DS and kind of wanting Mario 64 DS more. But they convinced me to get this one and promised me, oh yeah, we can trade and we can play both of them because they already had 64 DS. And I'll just say that trade only went one way. So it would be quite a bit longer until I would play Mario 64, which is kind of crazy. Because as good as this game was, like, I like Mario 64 significantly better. Even the DS version. So I don't know, I just wonder how things would be a little differently if I was introduced to that game and, 3D platformers outside of Crash in general earlier, considering Crash is a lot more linear, and I would really fall in love with the more open ones, particularly when I finally played a bit of Banjo-Kazooie. As I said before, I was a big Crash Bandicoot fan growing up. There was one DS exclusive. I did get it. It is considered to be the worst game in the series by many. Honestly, I don't think it's as bad, at least from my memories, as people say it is. Now, I haven't played it in like over 15 years at this point, probably. But I don't know. I remember sort of liking a few of the things this game did, like in Mario Party, you win a minigame, you get 10 coins. And here, you're actually rewarded based on your performance in each minigame. So to a certain degree, I kind of liked that sort of more skill-based reward system. I remember there being a little board variety too, between, your standard looping board and a more linear one where you just try to get from point A to B, which I appreciated in a DS game, since that was something that Mario Party on console was sort of just introducing with board variety. I liked some of the deep cuts they made on the roster. Like I said, I liked the Pauline deal in Mario vs. Donkey Kong. This kid did the same thing with Tana, who, yikes, was she only in the first game until this point? Maybe? And I thought Pinstripe was cool. So him, and even Crunch, I believe this was the first time both of them. I'll scratch that. First time Pinstripe was playable outside of a kart racer. Crunch, I remember there was some Crunch levels in one of the Game Boy platform Crash games. Like I said, I played the shit out of Crash games back then. It's kind of crazy I even still remember these details now. Mentioned this game when we went over PC in this series, but I did get the DS version of Zoo Tycoon. Once again, I thought it was solid. Not as good as the PC version, of course, but at the same time, like I said, with the DS and the Game Boy, the difference between, a home console and a handheld was almost like night and day for me. I guess knowing how GBA ports were, my expectations for a lot of these games were very low and were exceeded with, how much closer they were able to get to that console-like experience. Sims 2 Pets. This was one of those games where I just learned about The Sims and was really interested in checking it out. And I asked for The Sims 2 without really specifying anything, so whoever got it probably, well, I play on my DS more and this one's cheaper. What's the difference? I think this was kind of an answer to Nintendogs. I don't remember being able to do much outside of interacting with your dog. Although I think there was still some character customization too. I mean, maybe I just never made it far enough in the game to where, I don't know, your character does something. Like, I don't know, maybe if you trained your pet enough, there would have been events or something. I don't know. This one was a little disappointing. I did give it a fairer shot than usual, actually. Because I even remember being confused, thinking, well, similar to the Animal Crossing situation, that maybe I was missing something and had to unlock some of the other features I heard about normal Sims 2. But that never happened, and I probably still never really made it that far overall in general. Speaking of Nintendogs, though, it was part of the Touch Generations brand. Never had Nintendogs itself, but I did have several games from this branch. Actually, I was just reading the page. I didn't even realize Magnetica was part of that. I did have it, though. It was fine from what it was. From what I remember, it was kind of just a bubble shooter. I remember particularly wanting one of the Brain games. I don't remember if it was Brain Age or Big Brain Academy. And I'll give them credit for their marketing, too. Because either that or word of mouth got me to want an edutainment game, basically. And I can imagine that being a tougher sale for younger people to get excited about. But yeah, I remember looking forward to getting one of these games. Maybe it was both. I actually did have both Brain Age games, too. And some of these Touch Generation games, too, were some of the few games my parents picked up and tried out, too. And I remember actually having some fun, particularly with Brain Age, I believe. Because I remember we all got competitive with, they had like a challenge mode, and the better you do, you get the lower age. And I remember being really excited when I finally surpassed my mom and had the youngest Brain Age. Not part of Touch Generations, but similar deal. We had a dedicated Sudoku game, Sudoku Mania. I don't know if Brain Age inspired this, because I think some versions of it came with a Sudoku minigame in it. I didn't play this one a lot. This is actually, besides Tetris, one of the few games I remember my mom playing quite a bit. I also had Touchmaster, which was another pleasant surprise. I hadn't heard of the game at all. I guess the best comparison I can make is maybe something like Clubhouse Games, where it has a lot of, just classic tabletop and card games to play. It was a solid time, and I was actually getting them from a family member every year while they were coming out, all three of them, since I was enjoying them. It was an easy gift, although I don't remember playing 3 that much. I guess I kind of was maybe fatigued and just moved on. Funny that the first Kirby platform game I had, because I did have Air Ride, which may have inspired me wanting this game, was, I believe, the first post-Sakurai game, actually. I remember I did like this more than New Super Mario Bros. I remember I completed this 100% on my own. I do have a 100% save on New Super Mario Bros., but I'm 90% sure that was probably from, because I used to have an action replay too. I didn't really use it much. The only other thing I remember doing with it is turning all the all the weeds in my Animal Crossing town into bags of bells. I used that to finish paying off my house. And finally, probably the best game to end off on before our next part is Guitar Hero on Tour, because our next part we're going to get into the Guitar Hero Rock Band craze in more detail from my experience. But yeah, I remember being really excited for the DS one, because I just, back then when I was that young, couldn't get a hold of moving my fingers enough to be able to use the 5 buttons. So I always played on normal, since that one only required 4. But this one only had 4, so maybe I can finally play on expert like all the cool people. I don't think I was actually able to do that, but I was able to play on hard a bit better. And I had both the first one in decades. Surprisingly, I did not have modern hits, which is weird because when I dive into Guitar Hero and Rock Band, I had more entries than I was missing in both series, which you remember like how frequently they were coming out in that back then too. It's just surprising looking back at, I don't know if maybe I got a little, I don't know, the novelty of playing on the go wore off, and I just wanted to focus on completing more of the console games that I had for it. But yeah, next time we'll have a combined Wii Xbox 360 episode, and that's kind of the finale.